When you look at the Gospels, it's amazing how many things the disciples didn't understand. In this week's talk, we'll look at how they responded and why "I don't know" is one of the most powerful faith statements you can make.
The Bible is a book that is full of surprises all the time. Still today, I read things and I find things that surprise me. There are plot twists along the way. There are people that you think are going to be good that end up being the bad guys, and we'll get the lights on here in just a minute. There are shocking things that Jesus said that are sort of counterintuitive. But maybe one of the most surprising things about the Bible is just how open the gospel writers were about the times when they didn't understand what was going on. You read Matthew, Mark, Luke, John. On the regular, guys were saying, we didn't get it. We were confused. We didn't know what Jesus meant, or we didn't know what he was trying to do in that moment. And that's really unusual for writers of history. Okay, Josephus is the most famous secular Jewish historian from antiquity. He didn't fill all of his writings with times when he said, yeah, I had no idea what the Jews were doing. It didn't make sense to me. You won't see that in Josephus. Herodotus was sort of considered the father of Western history, writing about the Greeks and the Persians. He didn't fill all of his accounts with times when he didn't understand. Even in more recent times, Winston Churchill, you may not realize this, kept pretty detailed memoirs of his experience of World War II. And he didn't fill his memoirs with things, we didn't understand what Hitler was doing, and FDR, it didn't make sense to me. You would never say that because it sort of makes you seem like a less credible eyewitness. But the gospel is full of them. Let me read just a few, and if you're flipping through with a paper Bible, don't give yourself a paper cut. We're going to go really fast. If you want these, all of these references, you can message me after service and I'll send them to you. Here are just a few examples. Matthew 15:16, Jesus says, don't you understand yet? Matthew 16:9, don't you understand even yet? Matthew 16:11, why can't you understand? Mark 4:13, if you can't understand the meaning of this parable, how will you understand all the other parables? Mark 6:52, the disciples still didn't understand. Mark 7:18, don't you understand either? Mark 9:32, they didn't understand. Luke 18:34, they didn't understand any of this. They failed to grasp what Jesus was talking about. And then you get to John, and John was writing later, right? So the other ones had been written. John comes along later. Probably, we don't know for sure, but probably John was familiar with the gospel that Peter had been giving verbally that got written down by Mark. He doubles down on this whole "we didn't get it" thing. Listen to these, okay? John 6:60, many of his disciples said, this is very hard to understand. John 8:27, they still didn't understand. John 8:43, why can't you understand what I am saying? You get the feeling Jesus is feeling sort of like Chris Tucker, right? Do you understand? Do we have that? Do you understand the words that are coming out of my mouth? No, they did not understand Jesus. John 10:6, those who heard Jesus use this illustration didn't understand what he meant. John 12:16, his disciples didn't understand. John 13:7, you don't understand now what I am doing. John 13:22, the disciples looked at each other wondering who Jesus meant. John 13:28, none of the others at the table knew what Jesus meant. John 14:9, have I been with you all this time, Philip, and yet you still don't know who I am? John 16:18, what does Jesus mean by a little while? We don't understand. And then just in case you thought that John was writing to make all of the other guys look like doofuses so that he would be smart, he also includes himself in the disciples who didn't understand. John 20:8-9, okay? The disciple who reached the tomb first, that's John, also went in And when he saw, he believed. For until then, they still hadn't understood the scriptures. So even John's like, dude, I didn't get it. It didn't make sense until I'm in the empty tomb. I'm like, oh, I guess he actually did mean he was coming back to life. They're so full of those moments. It's, when you look at them like that, it's kind of overwhelming. How many times the guys and the girls just did not get it, right? Because you understand, more than just the 12 disciples were traveling with Jesus. There were a huge group of people, men and women, and so many times they didn't understand. And here's why that's a good thing for you and for me, because I get stuff that I read in the Bible that I don't always understand. Or I see things that are happening in the world and I think, God, why don't you stop this? Or why don't you change this? And I don't understand. And if these guys who were seeing it firsthand, who could just walk up to Jesus and say, would you explain that real quick to me? If those guys still had a lot of stuff where they go, I don't know, then I'm in good company when I don't understand things. I should feel differently about not understanding things. And I want to talk to you today a little bit about those moments when you don't understand what God was doing in the Old Testament or something that happened in the New Testament. When you don't understand, Jesus, did you mean this literally, or did you mean this sort of as a symbol? Or when you don't understand what's happening in your life today, I want you to draw some inspiration from the disciples, and we're going to learn a little bit, because ultimately we are all disciples of Jesus. We didn't get to be there in person, but we're still following. Let me give you a couple things you need to do when you don't understand. First, write this down in your notes or on the Bible app. If you have the Bible app, you can get this all right there on your phone, take notes, and email it to yourself. It's very cool. You should try it. Hey, number one, when you don't understand, ask someone. Ask someone. So many times there are things that we don't understand, but they're easily explained. Maybe we're looking at it in the wrong way. Maybe we have a preconception that's getting in the way. One of the challenges as a Western culture person, as an American, is that I see the world very much in an individual perspective. And the Bible was written to a culture that was very communal. Sometimes I don't understand just because I'm looking through the wrong lens. And it's an easy thing to correct once I get that other piece of information. But you can't always get that piece of information just from yourself. Sometimes the Holy Spirit does not reveal stuff directly to you. He has that knowledge in somebody else, but you have to be willing to ask someone. Look at this. I love the honesty of Peter when he's writing this. Mark 9:32. And let me clarify that. Peter didn't write it down. Peter had a verbal account of the gospel. Mark's the guy who wrote it down, which is why his name gets to be on the book, okay? But I love the honesty here. Mark 9:32, that's the disciples, they didn't understand what Jesus was saying, however, and watch this, and they were afraid to ask him what he meant. Now, just work with me for a minute through this. What were they afraid of? Is there anything that we know about Jesus that would make you think, man, I am terrified of this guy? I mean, yes, he was powerful, but it's not as though they were afraid that, Thomas was going to ask a question and Jesus goes, what did you just say? And he turns like evil Superman and lasers him to death with his eyes. I'm melting. And everyone else is in shock, and Jesus says, any other questions? I didn't think so, right? We know that's not, okay, they're not literally afraid. What are they afraid of? What are they afraid of? They're afraid of looking stupid in front of the other guys. They're afraid of looking stupid in front of the women because, these guys came from a culture where only the men got educated in the scripture. So the fact that Jesus had also women who were traveling and he was teaching them the same. Oh man, I can't look stupid. I have to know all the stuff because the women are there in the back. Okay. They were afraid of looking stupid in front of Jesus. And because of that fear, they didn't ask and they stayed in the dark. There was things that they could understand. They just didn't want to ask. You've heard this before, and it's true in this context. The only stupid question is the one that you don't ask. There are people that God has strategically placed in your life. It's one of the benefits of being in church. I was thanking God today for the sound of all of the conversations happening in the room before service, because God has put people in your life who have a different perspective, and sometimes you don't understand. You just need to ask someone. Okay, so ask a friend. Ask your small group leader. Ask your section host. Ask your CR leaders. If you guys don't come to Celebrate Recovery, man, awesome group every week. Ask your student ministry leaders. Ask me. This may not surprise you, actually. Pastors completely nerd out on questions. When you ask us questions about the Bible, you might ask a question expecting a 2-sentence reply and get like half a publishable book. We love this. Okay, so ask. Don't be afraid to ask. Sometimes it's as simple as that. Now, sometimes there's something that you don't know, and you ask your section host, and they go, man, I don't know. And you ask your small group leader, you ask me, you ask your dad. Everybody's like, I don't know. Sometimes things are still mysterious to you. Here's what else you need to do. When you don't understand, write this down, hang on to who. When you don't understand why, when you don't understand when you don't understand how or where, and come on, I've had plenty of those questions before. When, God? When is this going to change? How long, Lord? How is this going to happen? Lord, who do you want me to marry? I'm thankful that he solved that problem for me. Yes. Okay, it's good to listen to prayers. But sometimes you don't know, okay? And so Peter talked about, we should have asked, we didn't ask. But then he kind of redeems himself in John's Gospel, chapter 6. Listen to what John writes. Did his friend a solid here. John 6, verse 60. Many of Jesus' disciples heard him and said, this is too hard for anyone to understand. Okay, Jesus was talking about stuff that was completely countercultural. And they said, dude, no one can get this. And they were frustrated because they didn't understand. Verse 66, and because of what Jesus said, many of his disciples turned their backs on him and stopped following him. Have you ever had a friend who was coming to church, who was identifying as a Christian, who was like, yes, I'm a Christian, and then they got caught up on that one issue? They got caught up, well, I don't know how the whole, how does the dinosaur bones thing work? I just can't reconcile it. Well, what about why would God say this about homosexuality here, but it seems like this here? I can't reconcile it. Why does God not mention the Dallas Cowboys when they are clearly his favorite team? I can't follow if he won't. Okay. And they turned and they walked away. And listen to what happens. Jesus then asked his 12 disciples if they were also going to leave him. And Simon Peter answered, Lord, there's no one else that we can go to, for your words give eternal life. And then watch this, put that up on the screens. Look. We have faith in you. And we are sure that you are God's Holy One. Peter says, I don't really understand either, but I don't have faith in my understanding. I have faith in you. I know you, so I trust you. And if you say that's how it is, that's enough for me. Because I'm convinced that you're the chosen one, that you are the Son of God. So even if I don't get it, I'm going to follow it. What an amazing statement of faith to say, I am still completely in the dark, but I trust you. And there are times when you're going to have to do that. There are times when things won't make sense. And sometimes one of the most powerful faith statements that you can make is to say, I don't know, but I trust you. How many times, those of you who are parents, how many times have you said, look, just trust me. I don't have time to go into it. Just trust me. I'm doing this to help you. Right? How many times? Okay, and this was me. Students, I'm not picking on you. I promise. This was me. I was on your side of it. Now I'm on the dad side of it, so I can see both. How many times have you taken 45 minutes to explain why? And they're like, this is stupid. You're like, but I'm doing this to help you. This is for your benefit. I promise in the long run. Sometimes you just got to trust, okay? But there's one other thing that you need to do when you don't understand, and this is the most important thing. Okay? So don't miss this, get this, write this down, chew on it, think about it. When you don't understand, you need to normalize the shrug. You need to normalize the shrug. The shrug, what do you mean? What are you talking about, the shrug? I mean, I don't know. Any of that, right? Any of you guys have the shrug emoji? You can learn a lot about somebody by looking at the phone and like their most frequently used emojis, right? Some of you guys have really positive frequently used emojis. I have the face palm one and the shrug one, and I don't know. Apparently, a lot of times, I'm like, ugh. Okay? But there's something so valuable to you when you normalize. Okay? What do you mean by normalize? I mean, like, it's not a surprise for me. It's not unexpected when I find something that the infinite God does that doesn't make sense to my small mammal brain walking around on one of the trillions of planets that he made. Like, yeah, okay. I wouldn't expect to understand everything. I don't know. There's something valuable there when you normalize the shrug. So John writes this in chapter 21. John 21:20. Okay? Jesus and Peter had been having this beautiful conversation where Jesus is restoring Peter to his position in the church after Peter had had some major failings. And they finish this conversation, and right at the end of it, John writes this, verse 20. Peter turned around, and he saw behind them the disciple Jesus loved. That's John. Back in the day, you wouldn't name yourself in a historical document, so John just referred to himself as the disciple Jesus loved. So he turns around and looks at John. As Jesus had been just talking to Peter about the way that Peter was going to be martyred and be killed for his faith. Peter asked Jesus, "What about him, Lord?" And Jesus replied, "If I want him to remain alive until I return, what is that to you? As for you, follow me." In verse 23, this is interesting. So the rumor spread among the community of believers that this disciple wouldn't die. But that isn't what Jesus said at all. He only said, if I want him to remain alive until I return, what is that to you? Interesting piece here. So John, when he writes this stuff down, we don't know for sure. He didn't date it. Based on evidence we have, somewhere in his early 60s to later 70s, when he writes his memoirs of Jesus. Okay? And he comes back later, we don't know how much later, and writes chapter 21 as an addendum to the gospel. If you ever read through the whole gospel of John, it's like watching the Return of the King. It fades to black in chapter 20, and you're like, wow, that's a great story. What a good ending. And then, oh, wait, surprise, there's another chapter, chapter 21. Okay? He came back later after having been a respected elder in the church, after having coached and mentored people in the church. And something so unique happens. Church people who came to faith after Jesus was resurrected get mentioned in the Bible. Not in a positive way, right? John says the whole community of believers got caught up in this rumor that was completely wrong. And something very powerful happens. John is writing to people who have faith, and he's like, hey, sometimes you don't get it too. It's okay. Understandable. Let me correct this one, but let me also write this in here to remind you sometimes you won't get it. So write this down. You need to normalize the shrug for yourself. It's expected. So just embrace it. Okay? I'll give you another football reference. I was talking to my son today. We are both Dallas Cowboys fans. And so I prepare for the season, understanding this is probably not a Super Bowl year. I have embraced a barely above 500 season. As long as we beat the Eagles or the Packers or the Giants or somebody, I'll have a good time, and then I'll watch somebody else win the Super Bowl. I've embraced it. You should normalize for yourself the idea that sometimes it won't make sense, and that's okay. If those guys didn't get it, you probably won't get it all the time either. But there's something else that happened in that passage that I want to look at here in just a minute. So get that ready on the screens, Danny. See, remember, John at this point, when he writes, he's in that day, he's pretty old. Most guys didn't make it to 65, 75, 85. And we know this, that after 66 AD, all of the other disciples, all of the other 12 were dead except for John. He's the last one alive. Think about this. Think of how valuable that human being was to the early church. If there was ever a controversy about what really happened, you can always go to John because he was there. There's ever a controversy, did Jesus actually say this? Well, go ask Father John. He'll tell you, right? Because he was the last one there. Mary lived in his house until she died. So John had all of the, okay, you wanted to ask about something from Jesus' childhood. He probably is the guy to know because Mary lived at his house. John was the authority on so many things and adds so much credibility to the other three Gospels, because if something in the Gospel of Mark was completely wrong, John would have said something. Okay? Very valuable that he was an eyewitness. The reason that we picked Eyewitness as the title for the series about John is because he was there and he wrote about what he saw with his own eyes. He begins in the first chapter saying, this is stuff that we saw and experienced ourselves. And John comes back after writing the full gospel and writes chapter 21. He adds it on. And I want you to watch what happens. So he says, there was this rumor that started going around. Peter didn't understand. The community of believers didn't understand. And then the very next verse, he says this, John 21, I think it's 24. He says, the disciple, the center of the rumor here, this is the one who testifies to the events and has recorded them here. And we know that his account of these things is accurate. John comes on to the end and he says, by the way, you can trust me because I was there. And don't miss this. He put that at the end of a story about people completely not understanding what Jesus meant. So it must have been pretty important for him to normalize the shrug. Because when you put those pieces together, okay, he normalized the shrug at the risk of his own credibility. Remember, Josephus didn't talk about stuff he didn't get. He normalized the shrug at the risk of his own reputation. It would have been easy for him to say, all these other knuckleheads didn't get it, but I always knew Judas was the bad guy. I always knew Jesus would come back from the tomb. I always got it. He didn't say that at all. Something so valuable that you need to hear, especially those of you who consider yourselves mature in the faith. Write this down. You need to normalize the shrug for the people who look up to you. So imagine John putting that extra chapter at the end of the gospel to say, sometimes it won't make sense. Trust me, bro, I was there. Imagine what that did for the believers who didn't understand everything. Imagine what that effect had to somebody who was new to the faith. Because you've got to imagine, and I know Peter and James were the leaders of the early church, right? The office of the Pope today is considered a continuation of Peter's office as a leader. But Peter's dead. James is gone. The only one left is John. Okay? And he would have been rightly respected by the whole community. And for the guy who has the answers, for the guy who we can go to where John lives and ask him and he'll answer the question, for the guy who was there to say, sometimes we didn't understand either. The community of disciples, the community of believers, all of them. What effect would that have on you when he says, hey, sometimes even I don't get it. Powerful effect. Because here's what happens. When leaders are willing to shrug and say, sometimes I don't know, then they make it safe for learners to shrug and say, sometimes I don't know. When leaders are humble enough to admit, this doesn't make sense to me either, they make it safe for people to ask questions. Because if the smartest guy in the room doesn't know, then I don't feel stupid for asking. It's powerful. When leaders shrug, they make an example of themselves, what it looks like to have questions and faith, and to be able to hang on to both simultaneously. They model what it looks like to walk forward in your faith through uncertainty. And it comes at a cost. Your children look up to you, and they expect that mom and dad, okay, at a certain age, they think mom and dad have got the answers. You have to be willing sometimes to say, son, I don't know either. But I trust him. The people coming to CR, they're looking to our leaders to say, okay, I am through a bad season and they're on the other side. 29 years on the other side of addiction, right? And even though they come to you for answers, there's something so valuable when you can say, you know what? I'm not sure about that either, but I trust him. And I'm still learning too. Do you understand how freeing that is? It's powerful. It's powerful. Look, I am in a season right now. I am doing graduate studies online in my spare time while I'm also a dad and a pastor. Okay? My brain is getting stretched all kinds of different directions. Can I be honest with you? The more I study and learn and hear all of these theories and look at all of these, well, technically the Greek is this and that. The more I study, the more little pockets I find of things in Scripture that I go, I'm not sure. Is it A or is it B? I don't know. I've never thought about it from this angle. Maybe the way I always looked at it was distorted. Is it this or is it that? Never is it true or not, but always do I understand it right or not. The more I look, the more I find. And yet, the more I live, and the longer that I've known the Lord, and the longer that God has been in my life, the more certain I have become in the things that I do know. The longer that I've lived on this planet with God in my life, the more confident I am that Christ came physically to this earth and lived in a body just like mine, that he died on the cross for my sin to make payment for my crimes, that he rose again physically, that he is alive forever, that everything he said I can depend on because it came from the very mouth of God. I'm more convinced than ever that I'm created in the image of God, and that he loved me just because I'm his, and that he's called me by name, and that he has adopted me as a son, and that I am held in his hands, and no power of hell can ever pull me out of his grasp, and that heaven is my home. I am more convinced than ever, even though I have questions. And there's something powerful when church leaders and mentors and elders and teachers and parents normalize the shrug. That's what we need here. That's what we need in churches across the world. God's church needs leaders who are more convinced and confident in their relationship with Jesus than in their understanding of theology. We need leaders who are more confident in their adoption into God's family than their answers to God's mysteries. We need people who are more confident in being saved than in being right, because those are the people that make it safe for everybody to have questions and to ask questions and to still have faith. That is the culture that we're building here. And section hosts, small group leaders, CR leaders, moms and dads and grandmas and grandpas, Betty Cooper and the elder statesmen of our church, hear me, please. Normalize having questions. Normalize not knowing everything. You do such a favor and a blessing to the people of our congregation when you make this a safe place to ask questions and not know and still have faith in Christ. That's who we need to be. So don't freak out when you have questions. Okay? You're in good company. Normalize the shrug and hang on to the one who's called you by name. Hey there, just wanted to take a minute to say thanks for watching. If a friend sent you this link, it's because they believe what we talked about today is going to make a positive impact in your life. And if it did, there's probably somebody that you care about who could benefit from it. So take a minute to share this video with somebody. Post it to your timeline or send them a direct link. And if you're able, take a minute to give using the link at the bottom of the description on this video. One last thing. Maybe you feel a tug at your soul and you're ready to take the next step in your spiritual life and form a relationship with God. We've got folks here who would love to talk with you about it. So just text prayer to the number on your screen and we'll follow up with you. It's also in the description on this video in case that helps. Thanks for watching and we'll see you next time.